Los Angeles, California. The evening air hung thick with exhaust fumes and the dying heat of a sun that had already surrendered to the horizon. Purple and orange bruised the sky above distant palm trees, their fronds hanging limp and motionless in the stillness, soldiers standing at attention for a battle that had already been lost. The city hummed its eternal song of distant traffic, of sirens blocks away, of lives continuing their relentless march forward. Quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. Deneen stepped out of her apartment building, fingers wrapped tight around the plastic handles of a trash bag that strained against the weight of another week's worth of solitary existence. Takeout containers she'd barely touched. Tissues soaked with tears she'd stopped acknowledging. The detritus of grief given physical form. Her mind was elsewhere, wandering through empty hospital corridors, through the sterile white room where everything had ended, through the silence where a cry should have been. It had only been a month. 31 days since she'd held her daughter for the first and last time. 31 days since the monitors had gone flat and the doctors had spoken in hushed tones and the world had continued spinning as if nothing had shattered. Grief clung to her like a second skin, heavy, suffocating, wrapped around her ribs like iron bands that tightened with every breath. Some days she forgot it was there, the way you forget a scar until your fingers brush against it. Other days, like today, it pressed against her lungs until breathing felt like drowning. She exhaled slowly, watching the ghost of her breath disappear into the cooling air. The streetlight above her flickered, a dying heartbeat casting jagged shadows across cracked pavement. Someone should fix that, she thought absently. Someone should fix a lot of things. Then she froze. A man, slumped near the curb, half collapsed against the wheel of a parked Honda Civic that had seen better decades. His body was folded at an unnatural angle, one arm extended toward the street as if reaching for help that hadn't come. His head lolled against the tire, and even from 15 feet away, she could see the darkness spreading beneath him. Blood. Pooling on concrete, seeping into cracks like fingers reaching for escape. Even from a distance, she could tell he didn't belong here. Not in this neighborhood of flickering streetlights and cars that needed fixing. Not with that suit. Tailored. Expensive. Charcoal gray fabric catching the last threads of dying sunlight, crisp lines now wrinkled and stained with something darker than shadow. Tom Ford, maybe. Armani. The kind of suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent. Everything in her told her to turn around, go back inside, lock the door, call 911 and let someone else handle it. But she didn't, because she was a nurse. 12 years in emergency rooms had burned that identity into her bones deeper than anything else, deeper than grief, deeper than fear. The instinct to help wasn't a choice anymore. It was a reflex muscle memory coded into every cell of her body. She couldn't ignore him, even if everything about this screamed danger. "Sir, can you hear me?" She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees on concrete that bit through her jeans with tiny teeth of broken glass and neglect. The trash bag tumbled forgotten beside her, spilling its contents across the sidewalk, a metaphor she didn't have time to appreciate. Her fingers moved automatically, years of training taking control where conscious thought had no place. 2 fingers to his neck, pressing into warm, damp skin that felt fever-hot against the cooling evening air. Pulse. There, but weak, thready. Like a dying engine sputtering its last, fighting for every revolution. The kind of pulse that made experienced nurses exchange knowing glances across trauma bays. The kind that said, "We're losing him." His lips had a faint blue tint, cyanosis, her medical brain supplied automatically. The color of winter mornings. The color of drowning victims she'd seen pulled from swimming pools and bathtubs. The color of oxygen-starved tissue beginning its slow surrender. His breathing came shallow, uneven. Each inhale a struggle that rattled in his chest like wind through broken windows. She could hear the fluid, could almost feel his lungs fighting against whatever was filling them. Not good. Not good at all. Her eyes scanned quickly, clinical assessment overriding the fear that wanted to send her running. Cuts along his hands, defensive wounds her brain cataloged automatically. Dried blood caked under his nails like rust, like he'd clawed at someone, like he'd fought. A gash above his eye, still weeping red in a slow trickle that had painted half his face in crimson war paint. And then a stab wound in his shoulder. The fabric around it soaked black crimson, the metallic scent of blood heavy enough to taste. Fresh, still bleeding. Whoever had done this hadn't been gone long. Oh my God. She reached for his jacket, pulling it open with trembling hands that hadn't trembled in a trauma bay in years. The silk lining was cool against her fingers, expensive, wrong, so desperately wrong against the violence done to his body. His eyes snapped open. She jerked back instinctively, heart hammering. But those eyes. Sharp, black as river stones polished by centuries of water. Ancient and young at the same time, holding depth she couldn't fathom in a single startled moment. His hand shot up, gripping her wrist. Hard. His fingers like steel cables wrapped in skin, surprising strength for someone who should have been unconscious, should have been dying. Poison. The word came out broken, fragmented. First in Korean, she recognized the cadence if not the meaning, guttural and urgent. Then English, the accent thick and strained. Each syllable cost him visible effort, carved lines of pain around his eyes. I was poisoned. Another breath labored. They're after me. Denning's head snapped up. She scanned the street with eyes suddenly sharp, suddenly searching for threats she hadn't considered. Nothing, no one, just the hum of distant traffic and that dying streetlight casting long, jagged shadows across empty pavement like reaching hands. Just her, and this stranger, and the blood pooling between them. But instinct told her he was telling the truth. Something in his eyes, the desperation there, yes, but also the clarity. He wasn't delirious. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly what had happened to him, and that scared her more than the blood. You need a hospital. It came out automatic, the response drilled into her across 1,000 emergencies. Call for help. Activate the system. Let the machine take over. No. His grip tightened on her wrist, not threatening, pleading. Desperate. Hospital, they'll find me. A wet cough, blood on his lips now dark and wrong. Kill me. Her heart pounded against her sternum like fists on a door demanding entry. Like it wanted to escape her chest and run. Every second mattered. She knew that better than anyone. Brain cells dying by the millions with each moment of oxygen deprivation. Blood pressure dropping toward the point of no return. A body shutting down, system by system. Can you stand? He nodded, but when she tried to lift him, his body nearly gave out. 200 pounds of muscle and bone and expensive fabric collapsing into her arms like a marionette with cut strings. The weight drove her to her knees, and for a moment she thought they'd both go down, both end up bleeding on this forgotten stretch of sidewalk. But she didn't let go. Some stubborn part of her refused. It took everything she had, every ounce of strength, determination, and adrenaline burning hot through her veins, to get him inside her apartment. She half-dragged, half-carried him up 3 steps that felt like mountains. Through a door she somehow managed to unlock with him leaning against her, down a hallway that stretched eternal in the flickering light. His weight pressed against her shoulder, his breath hot and ragged against her neck. The metallic scent of blood mixed with cologne, something dark and woody, cedar and smoke and expensive things that spoke of boardrooms and private jets and a world she'd never touch. By the time she got him onto the couch, she was breathless. Her back screamed. Sweat dripped down her spine, soaking through her shirt. Her arms burned with the effort of keeping him upright. But she didn't stop. She couldn't, because now that he was here, now that she'd made the choice to help him, there was no going back. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and Denning had no idea she'd just sealed her fate. Bathroom, medical kit, gloves. She moved fast, instinct taking over where emotion had no place. Her hands worked on autopilot, years of training guiding every motion like muscle memory burned into bone. The apartment was small, she'd apologized for that once, to someone who didn't matter anymore. But right now it felt even smaller with a dying stranger on her second-hand couch, blood seeping into fabric she'd never be able to clean. Focus. ABCs. Airway, breathing, circulation, the fundamentals, the foundation of everything, airway clear. She tilted his head back slightly, checked for obstructions, nothing visible, that was something, breathing shallow, irregular. Each exhale whistled faintly through his throat like wind through cracked windows. Too fast, too shallow, compensatory breathing, his body trying to make up for what it was losing. Circulation, she pressed 2 fingers to his neck again, counting. Weak pulse, thready, inconsistent. Like Morse code tapped out by dying fingers, the message unclear but the desperation obvious. Deneen leaned closer, watching the rise and fall of his chest beneath the ruined shirt. Too slow, too shallow. The fabric clung to his skin, damp with sweat and blood, outlining muscles that spoke of discipline and violence and a life lived in the shadows. His lips, she checked again, hoping she'd been wrong. Cyanotic. That faint blue tint wasn't subtle anymore. It had darkened with each passing minute, spreading like frost across his mouth, creeping toward his cheeks. His body was starving for oxygen, and she didn't have what she needed to give it. Low oxygen, possible toxin, or systemic poisoning. She spoke out loud without meaning to, an old habit from trauma bays, verbalizing to keep herself focused, to fight back the chaos threatening to overwhelm clear thought. Her fingers pressed again to his neck, counting silently against the flutter beneath his jaw. The skin there was cool despite his fever, clammy, slick with perspiration that smelled of fear and dying. Pulse, weak. Skin cool, diaphoretic. Slight tremor beneath the surface, muscles twitching involuntarily like something inside him was fighting to escape, or fighting to survive. She moved quickly, grabbing gauze from her kit, white squares that turned crimson the instant they touched his shoulder wound. She pressed hard, applying pressure, feeling warm blood seep between her fingers despite her efforts. Sticky and thick, the color of garnets in low light. Come on. The cut above his eye, superficial, already clotting into a dark line. She'd deal with that later. His hands, she examined them quickly. Defensive wounds, as she'd suspected. Knuckles split open like cracked earth. Palms sliced where he'd grabbed a blade meant to kill him. He'd fought. Whatever had happened to him, he hadn't gone quietly. But the poison that was killing him slower, creeping through his bloodstream like ink in water, like darkness spreading through a sunset. A blade was honest in its violence. Poison was a coward's weapon, working in silence, invisible until it was too late. Her mind flipped through possibilities. Neurotoxin. The muscle tremors suggested possible nerve involvement. Hematoxin. Could explain the bleeding. Something ingested. The timeline seemed too fast. Injected. Most likely, given his profession, whatever that was, the symptoms didn't quite fit any standard profile. Too slow for cyanide, too fast for arsenic, too strange for anything she'd studied in textbooks or encountered in emergency rooms. She checked his pupils, pulling back one eyelid with her thumb. Slight dilation. Delayed response. The black swallowing the brown, sluggish and uneven like oil spreading over water. Whatever was in his system, it was affecting his nervous system, slowing everything down. This isn't just blood loss. Her heart pounded. Hospital would have been the answer. Clean white walls, IV drips, activated charcoal, whole blood transfusions, teams of specialists with equipment and knowledge she didn't have. A system designed for exactly this. But he'd said no. Said they'd find him, kill him, and something in his eyes, in the desperate clarity there, made her believe him. Which meant she had to stabilize him herself. Poison. Her mind raced. Lectures in sterile classrooms a lifetime ago, emergency case studies printed on thin paper, rare interventions whispered about in break rooms by nurses who'd seen too much and couldn't forget. What did she have? What could she use? Nothing. She had nothing. No antivenoms, no antidotes, no specific treatments for toxins she couldn't even identify. A basic medical kit meant for cuts and burns and minor emergencies, not assassination attempts. And then something clicked, not standard, not guaranteed, not something she'd ever done before, but possible support. Her hand rose slowly to her chest, fingers pressing against the ache there that never quite went away, against the fullness that had no purpose anymore. And everything inside her tightened. A memory surfaced, uninvited, unstoppable, bright hospital lights. Cold, too cold. Fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead like dying wasps trapped in amber. The smell of antiseptic and something worse beneath it. Beep. The flatline, her body on that bed, sheets too white, too crisp, smelling of bleach and failure and the end of everything she'd wanted. Empty arms reaching for nothing, grasping at air where a baby should have been. I'm so sorry. The doctor's voice, distant and practiced, saying words she couldn't process, explaining things that didn't matter. She remembered the weight that wasn't there, the silence where a cry should have been, the hollow, empty ache in her chest where her daughter should have been placed, warm and alive and perfect. Her baby girl, gone before she ever got to hold her, really hold her. Not the brief moment they'd placed that too still body in her arms that didn't count. That was goodbye before hello, an ending before a beginning. She never got to count 10 perfect fingers while they grasped at air. Never got to kiss a soft forehead still warm with life. Never got to whisper a name into new skin and watch recognition dawn in unfocused eyes. But her body didn't understand loss. It still prepared. Still produced. Still held onto something meant for a life that never came. Like a garden that kept blooming for a gardener who would never return. Her chest ached now, standing in her apartment with a stranger dying on her couch. Heavy, full, swollen and tender, a reminder she couldn't escape no matter how many cold compresses she used, how tightly she bound herself, how hard she tried to pretend her body hadn't prepared for something beautiful that turned to tragedy. "This was supposed to be for you." The words came out barely whispered, meant for a ghost, for a daughter who would never hear them. Her eyes closed briefly. Pain rising sharp and bright behind her ribs, grief cresting like a wave that wanted to pull her under. Then she pushed it down, the way she'd learned to, the way she'd had to, because someone was dying in front of her. Someone real and breathing barely and present. Someone she could still save. Proteins, enzymes, immune support. Immunoglobulins and antibodies, living medicine her body created without permission, without consent. Things meant to protect, to nurture, to give life. Research she'd read during those long months of pregnancy, preparing for a reality that never came. Studies about the immunological properties, the antibodies, the way it could support compromised systems. Not a cure. She had to be clear with herself about that. But something, a chance. Immune support for a body fighting against a toxin she couldn't identify. And something was better than nothing, wasn't it? Her fingers trembled against her shirt buttons. This was insane, medically questionable at best. Ethically complicated, personally devastating. But what choice did she have? Watch him die when she might be able to help. "You're going to have to trust me." Her voice came out stronger than she expected, steadier than she felt. "I'll explain later." He watched her through half-lidded eyes. Even now, even barely conscious, even dying, those eyes were sharp. Aware, calculating, taking in every movement, every hesitation, cataloging her like a threat assessment. What kind of man was he that even at death's door he couldn't stop analyzing? She adjusted him carefully, lifting his upper body slightly to support his airway. Her hands slid beneath shoulders hard with muscle, feeling the latent strength there even in his weakened state. She angled him so he wouldn't choke or aspirate, propping him against the armrest. Her fingers hesitated on her shirt, just for a second. Then she removed it, the cotton cool against her overheated skin. Her bra followed, the clasp releasing with a quiet click that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Heat flooded her face instantly, burning from her cheeks down her throat. She wasn't a woman who blushed. 12 years in emergency rooms had burned that out of her, but this was different. This wasn't clinical anymore. This was personal, raw, vulnerable. Every inch of her exposed in the dim light of her living room, shadows pooling in the hollows of her collarbones. The evening light filtering through thin curtains, painting her skin in shades of gold and amber. But she didn't stop. She guided him gently, supporting his head with one hand, fingers threading through damp black hair that was softer than she'd expected. She brought him closer, cradling him against her. His breath hitched, not just from weakness, from awareness. Even dying, he knew what was happening, knew the intimacy of what she was offering, the vulnerability. Then he accepted, weak at first, uncertain, his lips barely moving. Then instinct took over. Something primal and ancient waking in a body fighting for survival. His grip tightened slightly against her arm, fingers curling into her skin hard enough to leave crescent marks that would bruise by morning. Denine's breath caught in her throat. From the physical sensation, unexpected, startling. From the grief that rose up without warning, this was supposed to be for her daughter. From the purpose that bloomed alongside it, she was saving a life. From something else she didn't want to name. Something that felt too much like connection, like intimacy, like the terrible closeness of life passing between bodies. "He's a patient, just a patient." The words were meant to ground her, to keep this clinical, professional detached, but her voice wasn't as steady as she wanted it to be. It trembled at the edges, fracturing around the lies she was trying to tell herself. After a moment, she gently pulled back, her skin cool where he'd been, tingling with awareness. That's enough, we'll do this in intervals. She repositioned him carefully, checking his breathing again. Fingers at his throat counting beats that came slightly stronger than before. Slight improvement. Still weak, but more consistent. The blue tint fading from his lips, color slowly seeping back into pale skin like dawn breaking over a winter landscape. It was working, even if just a little. Even if it cost her something she couldn't name. It was working.